This is the IBJ podcast for the week of January the 6th, 2020, brought to you by the law firm Craig DeVault. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody, for our first edition of 2020. If your resolution is to be better informed, you're probably in the right place. I personally set resolutions every year, none of which I have ever kept for more than a couple months. But as you'll hear in our interview this week, I have a lot of help from my wife this year as we try to get our spending under control and set some financial goals. So this seemed like a really good time to check in with IBJ columnist Pete Dunn, aka Pete the Planner, about the best ways to set yourself up for success with financial resolutions. Here's our conversation. Pete, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Mason. I'm very excited to share 2020 with you so early.
So for a couple of years, my wife and I have resolved to get our finances in order. I mean, to know where we're spending the money and to actually have a budget. And, it didn't usually work out.
Sure.
This year, though, it's a little bit easier because she's no longer a freelancer. She has an actual paycheck, which is great. So this actually did happen, and we got an app, and we gave it access to probably a dangerous amount of information about our finances. And then we went through all of our, credit card statements and our debit card statements, and we, got going. And I will say that it's been a mixed bag so far. The app is not what you would consider to be user-friendly, or what I would consider to be user-friendly. My wife is smarter about this stuff than I am, so we'll get it figured out. But I was kind of despairing, and I was thinking, how are we going to keep this from being like my weight loss goals?
Right.
I mean, how are we going to keep this from just falling by the wayside 2 months from now? And then I thought, you know what? There got to be hundreds of thousands of people who are going through the exact same thing right now. So my question is very generally is about how do you create a financial resolution that is meaningful that you then also can effectively accomplish over here and stick to?
Yeah. So the first thing is you got a bunch of data this year. You got good data, arguably. Right? Yeah. So good that you've compromised your own privacy and data security, right?
Yes.
That's how good it is. So that is actually a first step, right? But the goals themselves really matter as how they play into the data, because I'm not, you mentioned your goal was to get it together. That is actually nothing. What you've just expressed is an idea, which is nothing. It's not actually a goal. It's a thought. Yeah. But I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you had that thought. But it's hard to hold yourself accountable to get it together because it's so subjective. Where do you begin and end? Mrs. Planner and I just had our annual meeting right as the year turned 2020 last week. We've been doing it for a long time now. So hopefully what we can do in the next several minutes is I'll give you some tips on how to make sure you're setting the goals correctly and then how to let those goals hold you accountable to your overall financial picture.
That'd be beautiful.
Yeah, let's do it. So here's the thing. First off, there's three types of goals that people typically set when around money. The first is the most common, and it's called the consumption goal. We want to buy a new couch. We need a new fridge. We need to replace this car. So those are very common, and they're better than not having those goals, because in not having those goals means you just react and you buy them and you don't plan for it. My guess is you and your wife have had consumption goals in the past.
Well, yes.
Yeah. We want to go on this vacation.
I will say that, my modus operandi for financial planning has been basically, put the money into the 401k, and that's the money that we're saving, and then pretty much managing my life from my checking account balance.
That's not unusual. And in fact, that can actually work really well with one caveat there. And replace 401k, it doesn't matter that it's a 401k for this conversation, but whatever you're contributing toward your financial goals, to do that first and then spend the rest however you want. And there's a really good way to do it. This is the way we actually do it. It's a very lazy way to budget. It's to make sure what you're contributing actually will accomplish your goals. Because otherwise, what people do is they'll put a slightly painful amount of money towards their 401k or towards their goals. But Mason, it's not necessarily the right amount. It's just what hurts enough to make it feel like the right amount, and it's not the right amount. So then you sacrifice, and then you penny pinch the other money, and in the end, nothing ever feels any better. Right? So what we try to do at our house, or what we've come to do over the last decade or so, is we really do fund our goals to the penny as to how we project them to play out. College, retirement, and then other little goals here and there. Then we don't actually budget. None. But there's one way you can get away with that, by refusing to go into credit card debt, right? So we don't budget. It doesn't matter if I spend too much on a pair of jeans or too much on a meal, because we refuse to go into debt and our goals are already taken care of. And so for us, that's become very invigorating, very powerful way to reward ourselves for taking care of business.
Wow. That sounds a little bit like what I was doing, except
It's
I
really
wasn't
close.
I wasn't budgeting for the big thing.
You're really close. And by the way, ours evolved from what you described. In just a couple of years, it turned into what we're doing. The making sure you're funding your goals to completion is crucial. Because if you don't, you are premeditated failing. Beyond that, you have to promise to not go into credit card debt, which means you need a proper emergency fund, because life happens and it stinks when it happens and you need to be able to fund it. I think where most people go off the rails is they get this feeling of what they want to do, but they don't put the metrics behind it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you bring that up, because I think a lot of people have the sense, at the beginning of the year, and sort of state it like I did, is they want to get their financial lives in shape. There are a lot of different things that you might need to do. One of the questions that I think a lot of people might have is, what do I do first? Do I, for example, make an emergency fund first, or do I pay down my credit card debt first?
Generally speaking, paying down consumer debt is a better idea than stacking savings. Now, that being said, you're going to want some marginal amount of savings, $1,000, $1,500, just to have your back for a flat tire or an appliance that goes out that you're going to need help with. Beyond that, you really should, when it comes to your present day life, you really should focus on getting out of debt. All of this being said, though, in my estimation, where most people fail from the very beginning is by not funding the long term. You do yourself a lot of favors by taking care of it now, because if you feel perpetually in your financial life like you're always playing catch up, like you can never get ahead, it's because you didn't think far enough ahead. My wife and I, in our annual conversation last week, it is my annual confessional where I step back and I say the same thing every year. I'm so mad at the 22 to 27-year-old Peter Dunn still to this day, because I did not do what I should have done until I was 28, and I did not do it to the level that I'm doing it now until I was 32. And the most important years are not me as a 42-year-old now. They were at 22. 20 years ago, I made my life harder, and I told myself lies about what was important. And I'm not kidding. I'm still frustrated about it because of all the opportunity lost.
Okay, let's say that I'm somebody in my 30s.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're not. I mean, this is quite the stretch, but go right ahead.
Okay, if I'd gotten a haircut before
let's say I'm 6'5".
I would have looked younger. So say I'm in my 30s. What are examples of long-term goals, and how am I supposed to know how much that stuff is going to cost?
I've oversimplified that process of saying to know how much things are going to cost. Really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to discover how much income you want to have available to you when you no longer work. Okay, so that's let's pick a number now. I mean, number doesn't matter. Let's say right now you want to live on $50,000 a year. Then what you will say?
Are you talking about retirement?
Well, no, I'm saying. Well, let's just say now. Okay, let's just pick a number right now, and a time and a number. Right now, let's say you are comfortable on $50,000 a year. So you say, okay, well, I would like this type of lifestyle when I'm 30 years older. Okay, so then what you do is then you figure out with inflation what it costs. Or how much money you need to provide a $50,000 a year lifestyle 30 years from now. And then you work backward off of that. And then eventually you figure out how much you need to put into your 401k every month. The good news is just about every financial calculator on the planet can do that on the internet in about 25 seconds.
Well, that was my question,
yeah.
Which was, that sounds like a big lift to me.
Sure.
But there are resources available to help me do that.
Yes. Here's the interesting part about the financial planning world. That's every financial planning problem is what I just described. It's future value of money, dealing with those things. Sometimes the financial planning community does a really good job of making those sources readily available and accessible for all. And for people that don't have that access, that is what the free internet is for. And again, you can find retirement income calculator. Google it, and there you go. You're off and running.
What about the problem of sticking to your resolution once you have it?
I mean, that's something I struggle with too. I mean, with fitness and food and imbibing, all those sorts of things that we try to resolve to do differently. I think it's about chunking down your resolution into an achievable 30-day goal. It'd be a shame if you and your wife step back and look at this for the first time December 31st of 2020 and to see if you did a good job. Ideally, you take a few minutes on January 31st of 2020, just a few weeks from now, and say, okay, how'd the first 30 days go? that's the best way to go because you're not getting enough feedback otherwise. I think most people fail on their goals, one, because they're not measurable, right? If you say we want to do better, and even if you look on January 31st and say, do we do better? You're going to convince yourself you did because it's not measurable. So measurable and then short enough time frame that you can get that feedback that allows you to redirect the vote.
Yeah, my sense is to take these kinds of things in small chunks, to not do something that feels too monumental. So for example, I could say, well, my goal at the end of the year is to afford a new refrigerator and to have money for a trip.
Those are both consumption goals, and those both can be funded with just a deposit into a particular account. Like those are the easy ones. And before I forget, consumption goal is the first type of goal. Debt elimination is number 2, and then accumulation is number 3. So a debt elimination is you have a particular credit card bill that you've been wanting to get rid of, or your final student loan hanging on that you want to get rid of. And accumulation would be more toward college funding for your kids or retirement, something longer term. Those are the 3. I think accumulation is the best type of goal, debt elimination being the second best, consumption being the third best, although I don't mind it.
It sounds like you and the missus are mostly doing the accumulation goal.
Yes, but that's what years of planning do. We don't have any debt other than our mortgage. Our consumption goals, they just sort of change. We still buy stuff and do things and go places. But I don't feel like we're in the stage we used to be in. It's like, all right, what are we buying next? Okay, what are we going to buy next? And that's a weird stage people get into in their 30s primarily. That's an early 30s thing. Once you get a little 2 nickels to rub together and you get excited and you got a little more bandwidth from a financial perspective, you start forming these consumption goals, and that's where it can get dangerous because you never work your way into debt elimination or accumulation.
So again, I come to the question, what should I focus on first?
Saving $1,000. And I mean it. Saving $1,000 at least in your savings account at your bank with a not so easy of a conduit back to your checking account. In fact, we keep our savings at a separate bank than our checking account.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's old school. It's because I want to feel it. If I got to go move money out of my savings, I've got to convince myself it makes sense. The other crazy thing about this is I have no online access to that savings, and I have no ATM access to that savings. In order to withdraw from my savings, I have to go into the bank and withdraw cash, and that hurts.
So this is your $1,000.
Well, it's more than $1,000, but it needs to be at least $1,000.
But more like an immediate needs kind of savings.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, once you make a bad decision on a withdrawal from a savings account, anything reasonably better than that decision is deemed to be a good decision. So that's why people have this really unhealthy conduit from their savings back to their checking, no matter how much they're moving from their checking to their savings. So what I simply did a few years ago is I just disconnected it. And I'll say the other thing is my wife and I have separate checking accounts. It's all the same income going into 2 different accounts because we're 2 adults and we found it's easier to manage our spending with people managing different checking accounts because of the styles of which they manage it. And it works well. It works very well.
Wow, that's fascinating. Because my wife and I decided we would have ours together.
Sure, but you know what? You're not doing it wrong. You have to do what works for your relationship. My wife and I got married when we were 22. We had absolutely nothing. We learned about money together. There used to be this thing, if you don't trust your spouse with money, you don't trust them. I don't believe that anymore. I wrote that in a book that's like in my office here that we're in right now. I don't believe that anymore. My wife doesn't trust me on home improvement projects, but I'm pretty sure she trusts me. So I think part of this too is setting your banking up and the logistics of your finances up that gives your relationship the best chance to succeed. And I also need to mention, you need to talk about this once a month for about 20 minutes.
So what is it that you're checking from every month?
Problem areas, right? Okay. Where we just got a little wonky, maybe an involuntary expenditure, a small financial emergency where we didn't expect to spend $130 on this or that. But in terms of that discretionary spending, where it's like some couples give themselves an allowance, it's like, oh, well, I have $100 fund money and she has $100. We don't really mess with that because we have our own accounts and we split the bills in the sense that it's not like she writes me a check for $50. The way we do it is I have a certain number of bills that I pay and she pays the other bills, and those 2 amounts equal each other. And then beyond that, it doesn't particularly matter because we've pre-funded all of our goals. This falls when
you say pre-funded all of our goals, how did you pre-fund it?
Well, you pre-fund them in the sense that before your checking account gets hit or your money goes into your checking account, your paycheck goes into your checking account. all our goals are already funded. We direct deposit into all of our goals before it even begins.
Okay, let's take a quick break to jot down some notes and hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is brought to you by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
Okay, welcome back to the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King, and we're talking with Pete the Planner this week about setting and keeping financial resolutions. So if you have a resolution, number one, you need to know what your goal is.
Yeah, it needs to have a dollar amount and a date. Dollar amount and a date, or it's not a goal.
By which you are going to have it funded.
Yeah, and it can be, we'd like to pay down our Best Buy credit card by $380 by January 31st. Perfect goal. Yeah, it's better than get rid of our Best Buy credit card this year. Much better goal than that. Any goal can be chunked down to 30 days, and you have to quantify it with a dollar amount. You can't just say less or it's gone. You have to say what that dollar amount is.
So if I break our goals into monthly goals and then see how I'm doing.
Yeah.
Say for the refrigerator we want to buy, by the end of the year, right? That's a $1,400 refrigerator.
Okay.
So I break that into 12 months. Well, that's probably $120 a month. I can check in on that every month.
Absolutely. I mean, and if I'm you, I would either set up a separate account. You can do it anywhere online and just cordon off that money and make sure it hits there. There's another...
And I can arrange with my employer to have X amount of my compensation directed into that account.
Absolutely. Or you can just go to your bank and have it structured on your paydays that $60 a pay goes to your fridge account. And you can name it your fridge account online. There's other couple factors that really play into this too. Most people have 2 months in which they get more paychecks than the other months. Right. So identifying what those months are and allowing those months to help you are really important. Then also, if you happen to be a person that typically gets a tax refund, allowing that tax refund to come in and not save the day from a saving perspective, but to reward you by allowing you to complete a goal. We do that a lot when we help people with financial planning. We'll say, okay, we're going to set you up to have everything done by tax time, so then the tax refund can come in and wipe out that final debt, and then that's your reward for months and months of trying to get rid of it.
So where do these things usually go off the rails?
A lack of communication and terrible goals, wishy-washy goals, right? And let's be honest, though. A lot of couples don't see eye to eye on what is important from a priority standpoint financially. You know, we do have a few consumption goals, and we have them on a spreadsheet. We brainstormed them, and then we said, okay, what are our priorities? We mostly agreed. I mean, I decided to just not care to the point of like, well, okay, fine, this one can go over this one. I don't really care. But a lot of couples don't agree on that. And by the way, when you haven't fully funded your real long-term financial goals and a consumption goal all of a sudden feels more important than funding retirement, that's where things can get weird. It also gets weird when people make different amounts of money within a household. You know, gender dynamics can play into this. And this is as complicated as a Rubik's Cube.
Now, what if I seriously screw up on my plan? Do I need to start over, or can I save myself somehow?
Well, I hate to answer a question with a question, but when you say screw up, do you mean go into debt, or what do you mean by that? Or just miss the mark?
Really just keep missing the mark.
There's no accountability then at that point in time, right? People love to make a big deal about, oh, you spend too much on dining out. You shouldn't spend so much on dining out. I'll be honest with you, it doesn't actually matter unless that dining out is preventing you from accomplishing a very specific goal. Where most people dine out too much forever and it kills them is that they don't match up that error with an unfunded goal. Because they'll say, let's do better. Well, we didn't do better, but we had a lot of good food. Like, that's not accountability. If you say, well, you know what? I didn't get to put that $120 into my fridge account in January because we went to Shoney's too many times. I mean, that is accountability. If you don't have measurable goals, then overspending doesn't matter. And you'll trick yourself into thinking, well, our lifestyle just increased. No, it didn't. You're just being a wimp. You're not matching it against your accountability.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing or have been doing which is saying I need to eat out less or spend less money eating out. But somehow it still seemed like we were still ending up with basically treading water, no matter how much I was actually following that, the very vague goal of spending less on X.
I think sometimes a hard reset is important, and I think maybe that's what we're getting at here, is that sometimes you have to shock the system so it feels different enough. For instance, a lot of times people are doing what they call dry January, which is where you do not imbibe with an alcoholic beverage or whatever you just don't want to drink for a month. And that is to shock the system to make you in February think differently about when you order a drink and how many you order. Mason, it's not that different for your finances. We did a thing, this is 2008, 2009, in which we began to count our transactions over the course of a week. Okay, so I feel a big part of consumerism is the frequency of which we whip out our debit card, our credit card, and cash. And we did a study actually here at our offices in 2009, and we found that the average American household spends money 22 times per week. Okay, these are not bills. This is stopping to get gas, grabbing a coffee, going to the grocery store, picking up the dry cleaning, 22 times in a week as a household. 2 adults, 7 days. If you want to shock your system, go to 10 to 14. And see how that changes your habits. And so what it does is it forces you to think, okay, do I really need this? You know what? No, I can just turn on the faucet when I get home from work. It causes you to critically solve problems with your brain and problem solving as opposed to money. Often you're like, it's $1. What's it matter? But see, it's not the dollar that matters. It's the mechanism of constantly pulling out your debit card. There's a point in time, if you're spending money 30 times a week, you actually don't care what you're buying costs. You just don't, because it's just another transaction. Different hit of dopamine. What you've described, you and your wife could very easily benefit, I think, from looking at 10 to 14 transactions in a 7-day period and see what that forces you to do. It forces you how to think differently. You'll certainly spend less, but when that period is over, it will change your habits because you'll say, why do we do that? Why do we always do that?
I have to say that the work at the beginning of this app, where we went through our statements to look at where this money is going, was really fascinating. And we actually found, I found, places where I had automatic debits on my cards, on my credit cards, that I wasn't even aware of. And yes, that means that I haven't been checking my statements every month. But there were places where money was just sneaking out, paying for some sort of, channel on Roku.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of really big ones that were charity related, where I didn't realize that I'd set up like an automatic debit.
Yeah, you got to stop helping people, man. Well, there's a guy in my office here who has this saying he came up with, and I love it. He maybe stole it. It's, we don't shame beginnings. If you look at your statement, you see all these things you did wrong, and this is where people fall off the wagon. They get so caught up in what they're not doing right that they're not motivated to do it right because they just would rather wallow around and, I'm not good at this. That's not helpful at all, right? It's great to rip that Band-Aid off. Look at all the things you've been doing silly and just resolve to do it differently. I'll also say, I'm making up numbers here, but let's say all of those silly transactions that you've just identified were $120 a month worth of waste. Well, there's your fridge money, right? And it's like as soon as you start matching up poor habits with what you actually want, change can begin to take place. I like that I'm banging the mic like I'm not a broadcaster. I did it twice in a row. So if you're listening at home, sorry about your eardrums.
Okay. What I'm hearing is another way to go about it is to say, set up the goals and then do whatever you have to do to meet the goal.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as just living your life and just making sure you don't go into credit card debt.
We've all had that friend that had a major heart event and they come back to work or where you see them and they've made major changes. They don't eat all the foods that you used to like to eat with them and they look great. Their clothes don't fit, but they look great. And they were forced based on fear and a life and death moment to change their habits. Financially, we let ourselves get way out over our skis because you can't really fail financially in America because of consumer debt. I mean, you can, but it's so ugly and beyond what the true failure is, which is a much shorter time frame. And so I think this idea of doing something drastic can really shock the system and is important. I would also say I think people have too many goals sometimes, right? They're like, well, we've got 35 goals this year, so that's probably too much. You know, once you fund the fridge and a vacation on monthly deposits, that go into those particular accounts, you really should only have 1 or 2 goals there, because otherwise your brain can't process what is more important than the other.
But at the same time, and we talked about this a little bit in the front, I still need to worry about saving for retirement. But that can
first.
But yeah, is that the first thing?
Yes. Yeah. When I say long-term goals funded, I mean retirement and college.
Right.
I mean sitting down and figuring out what you have, what you currently are doing, and where those two things will get you in the end. Is that the amount you need? Maybe the answer is no. If it's no, then what's the amount you need to save on a monthly basis? Going to that number and then base the rest of your spending off of that.
So those two things are...
Otherwise you're burying the lead.
#1.
Isn't the real story here is that if people struggle on a day-to-day basis, they're not going to get to their retirement goal. And so they will perpetually struggle financially. By accomplishing the retirement goal, it forces them to live on less, and therefore they learn to live on less and can deal with it. And by the way, and I always have to say this when we're together, this makes sense if you make above living wage. If you make below living wage, which you can find at livingwage.mit.edu, livingwage.mit.edu. If you make below living wage, nothing I've said actually matters whatsoever, because you're just not making enough money. And until you make living wage, your financial life will be turmoil all the time.
What I'm taking away from this is that should really be my #1 goal. Retirement / because I have children in college.
Retirement's the one thing you can't finance. You cannot borrow for retirement. Everything else in your life you can. People constantly live with this artificial comfort of an underfunded retirement plan. And I try every which way, including this podcast, one-on-one, to try to get people to realize that that is the fundamental issue.
Okay, so I'm going to go have another conversation with my wife.
I think that retirement number is helpful, because if you run a retirement calculator and you can say, all right, look, we're going to have, I'm picking a number, I'm making this up, $2,200 a month in today's dollars at retirement. We cannot possibly make that work. In order to have, making this number up, $4,800 a month at retirement in today's dollars, we would need to save $345 more a month. And then that's where the real work begins. Until you know that, nothing else matters. Really nothing else matters, because that's a problem that can't be solved any other way than solving it now. Because if you don't solve what I just said and you wait a year, it's no longer $345. It's $368. And the year after that, it's $420. And then it's a major problem.
So I need to go find a calculator.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the number. Everyone has to know that number. It's hard to care about financial resolutions when you don't take care of the primary aim of everyone's financial life, which is to fund your life when you no longer are working.
I'll check in with you in 2 months and we'll see what happens.
You have to know the number for retirement.
I'm going to give you the number.
No, look, we're figuring this out off the air at this point.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for your time.
All right.
Talk to you later. My thanks again to Pete. If you want more financial planning wisdom, you can check out his column in this week's edition of IBJ, focusing on how to set a 10-year financial goal. And there are a few stories I want to draw to your attention in this, our first issue of 2020. The leaders of the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra have several momentous decisions to make in coming months, in addition to getting the organization back in the black. Lindsay Erdotti explains how the ISO is approaching hiring a new concertmaster, beginning to search for a new conductor, and negotiating a new contract with its musicians, all while trying to avoid a deficit. Also in this week's issue, Anthony Shetley has the inside story on the creation of the Indiana 5G Zone, one of 2 labs of its kind in the country, which will be tasked with developing revolutionary new wireless technology. And Mickey Shuey explores the public-private partnership being finalized to help the city finance improvements to Broad Ripple Park. You can find all these stories in the print edition of IBJ that you, of course, have delivered to your home or office, or online at ibj.com. And remember, to have full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content, just hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbender. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.